few words about my research. It's sort of a next step to research that I found online, which was conducted in 7 countries across Europe across a period of, I think, 3 years. It included 7,000 individuals in 15 different cities in countries such as Belgium, France, Germany, Spain, Portugal, Hungary. And it tackles the issue of the problem of integration of migrants to Western and Central Europe prior to the refugee crisis or immigrant crisis, depending on how you want to call it today. So it has a lot to do with my background. I'm a third-year student at NYU in Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates, and studying away this year in New York. So in a sense, I'm very, very new to New York, and I would just like to say hi, coming from Bosnia. And I was born in the Bosnian War, and raised in the post-war period. So most of my family members were refugees who later became integrated into different societies in Western Europe, such as, for example, Denmark and Sweden. So that's my reason why I wanted to do research on long-term aspects of integration into Western European societies. So the first step is the research that I did on France in the last couple of maybe 6 months or so as a part of my class. So I did statistical analysis, basically. But the main issue here is the unsolvable problem of migration and integration after migration. So, I mean, immigration is just the process of moving from your domicile country to the country that you're not a citizen of. And integration comes as the next step, basically what you do in the country, in the host country, to use the proper term. So integration has been an issue, both politically and in the media and in terms of the host society. But nobody really, I haven't been able to find proper literature on the aspects of immigrants themselves on the process of integration. So that's why I took France. And I spent some time in France, so that's why I got interested in the long-term aspects of integration of immigrants into France. So I took 3 fields. Employment, and basically, so what I mean by 3 fields, I mean 3 large fields, and each field has different subsets to it, such as, for example, sub-questions that I asked. So, for example, employment, language, and citizenship, employment, citizenship, and political participation. So, for example, employment, as in the status of employment, whether somebody's employed, or whether somebody even asked or looked for a job, or whether there are discrepancies between one's skills and one's actual employment status. So, for example, whether they're overqualified or underqualified for their position, and whether they applied for citizenship, haven't applied for citizenship, what was the decision made at the end of the process, if they applied, whether they had difficulties, etc. So those are the questions that I asked. So why I asked this is because of the rise of right-wing parties in countries of Western Europe, especially, for example, the National Front in France in particular, with Marine Le Pen and her statement, which says that migration threatens previously cohesive societies in Europe. Even though in 1970s we had 14 million legal migrants in Europe, residing long-term residents in Europe. So in a sense, I was very, very appalled by that sentence and the statement itself. So basically, I went through these integration processes that the European Union imposed, or not imposed, but basically came up with. So for example, during 1990s, there was a big interest towards assimilation into the dominant culture of Europe. So there was no regard to the culture of the immigrants themselves, who would later on become the citizens of that country. Afterwards, we had different branches of that. Say, for example, France remained being assimilationist. Netherlands became multiculturalist, in a sense embracing these different cultures and letting them breathe within the territory of Netherlands. And for example, Germany sort of shifted to segregationist policies, especially towards its Roma community. When I say segregationist, I mean literally like different curricula in schools, for example. So only recently has integration of migrants become a two-way process. So in a sense, only recently have been there questions such as, what do migrants actually think about processes of integration, and what is their stance, what is their perception of these processes? So my focus was basically to see the differences between different groups of immigrants in France, these groups were divided into migrants from the Middle East, North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Eastern Europe. And I also wanted to see the differences in their integration as based on policies that were implemented by the government. So, for example, the government of France had a language course that some of these groups had to take in order to, say, for example, be eligible for citizenship or be eligible for employment, etc. So in a sense, I went through employment, citizenship, political and civic participation. When I say political and civic participation, I not only mean, say for example, somebody's status within a political party, for example, whether I'm a member of a political party, but I also mean somebody's tendencies to vote. For example, whether immigrants have any tendencies to have legal representation or political representation within the government, within the parliament, etc. So basically, really none of these matter in a sense. It doesn't really matter where you come from in a sense. It doesn't really matter what immigrant group you belong to, whether you're from Eastern Europe or Sub-Saharan Africa or North Africa, in terms of long-term integration within the French society. Except that the course only helped, the language course, the French language course, only helped improve some integration aspects for Middle Easterners, for example. But it really did nothing for any other group of immigrants. Or, for example, whether you know the language of the country or don't, it really doesn't matter. The integration overall was very, very bad. And on the scale, so because all of these aspects, I studied them individually and didn't really come up with anything exclusive, I combined them into a continuous scale from -1 to 1, where 1 means they're fully integrated into the society, and the long-term integration process was brilliant and very, very effective in France, -1 being that they are not integrated at all. I mean, my assumption before seeing the results was that they were somewhere around 0, depending on different groups. However, all of these groups were between -1 and 0. So it means that the integration overall across groups, regardless of whether they know French as their native language, regardless of whether they've been through the integration courses, one being the language course that the government offered, regardless of their status of employment, whether they're employed at all, the reasons why they came, because migrants, basically this research focuses on those that are born outside of the country that they're in. So it means it encompasses people who came when they were 17 as economic migrants, or those who came with their parents when they were 2 years old. So it really doesn't matter whether French is your native language or not. All of these groups, overall, on average, are very badly integrated into the French society. And that was the finding that shocked me. So, but that's just the first part of the research. So the next step is asking questions, okay, so how can we actually improve this? If the course doesn't do much except, for example, help certain groups such as the migrants from the Middle East get employment or acquire French citizenship faster, you need 10 years to live in the country in France to get the citizenship, just to mention the policy. So in a sense, the next step is actually looking at the nuances after this conclusion. What can we do? What can the government do? What can the government do to sort of raise the voice of migrants themselves? And also, what can the migrants do for themselves? For example, ask for more maybe political participation or political representation within the government, especially now with the rise of the right-wing parties across Western Europe. Maybe that's sort of like this balance that is needed. And also, a concrete next step in the research would be to actually look at different countries that the original study included, because they included their conclusions are made across migrant groups and across countries. So what I'm going to try to do is basically come up with different conclusions within each of these countries, Belgium and Germany and Netherlands and Portugal, Spain, Hungary, in addition to France, and sort of study whether we see the same phenomena, we see the same pattern of very, very negative integration into society, or whether things shifted before this migrant or refugee crisis, depending on how you want to call it. So that's basically it about. Yes, go ahead. We have.
maybe one quick question.
Thanks. Can I just ask a quick question of classification? Where did you put?
What?
A quick question of classification.
Oh, classification. Yes.
In terms of people coming from North Africa and the Arab, you mentioned Middle East and you mentioned Sub-Saharan Africa, and I was wondering if you related to which group and why, or if there was a separate group, because there's such a big trend of
Yes.
migrant people coming to France. I was wondering where you had decided to.
Okay, so the original study didn't make these distinctions. However, looking at the survey, which is a targeted survey of a stratified random sample, I divided people based on the region that they come from. Because the original survey didn't really divide people between, say, for example, North Africa and the Middle East. While I did that, just because of the different, say, for example, regarding France in particular, because of different historical reasons of France, different.
Yeah, Middle East, Northern Africa, and Sub-Saharan
Yes,
Africa.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Excellent. We are a little tight on time, so what I suggest we do is let's do the presentations, and hopefully if we're okay with them, we can do the official discussions. Otherwise, we'll have to do it unofficially. But first of all, let's extend our gratitude to Emina once again for having us.